We're talking about plagiarism. I'm going to be speaking more from the perspective of preventing plagiarism ahead of time by designing what we're going to call plagiarism-proof assignments. And Anne's going to be speaking more from the perspective of how to check up on if plagiarism is happening. So we're going to look at it from both perspectives. And then, of course, Vicki already spoke, but she was speaking about what to do once the violation has occurred. So what we're looking at for this first segment is how do I create plagiarism-proof assignments? And I would just love to start by asking you why you think students plagiarize. In your experience, what are some reasons that students plagiarize? Laziness, okay. Fair, yeah.
Feel overwhelmed, don't know how to do it.
They feel overwhelmed or don't know how to do it. Yeah, agreed.
They wait till last minute.
Last minute.
Time to learn the APA.
The APA.
Or just create a cheat sheet.
Yes, they don't take it takes time to incorporate APA into your writing and to look up every single citation, and they just don't take that time. I agree. Mm-hmm.
They don't know.
Some students just genuinely do not know. I completely agree. Any others? All really good. And you're right, and there's many different reasons why students plagiarize, and it could be stress. It could be they have a student, Christina, you were mentioning a student who had a child in ICU and was just feeling, again, entirely overwhelmed.
Competitive nature of some programs.
Competitive nature. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's because they don't feel like they're up to snuff. And so they plagiarize because they feel like they're going to be more successful that way. These are all really sad reasons. So that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is how we can help students avoid panic, avoid not knowing what to do, all of these different aspects. And a lot of it, I think, stems back to the student writing process versus a more experienced writing process. So one of the things that we're going to be trying to do is help students develop a more experienced writing process. But a typical student writing process looks something like this. And this slide isn't actually in your little handout, so if you're looking for it. They get a prompt, which is usually an external prompt because a lot of students don't wake up and think, oh, I'm going to write a 20-page paper in APA format. And then they tend to panic because they don't know how to approach this assignment. They don't know what to do. They don't think they're going to be able to do it successfully. Everyone else knows how to do this, but I don't know how to do it. So they feel like they're just not going to measure up. Then there's often this very long period of procrastination that occurs. And I think the students tend to start writing at the very last second when they can, if they don't start right now, they're not going to get it done, right? So that's the moment when they write as fast as they can. And as you know, a lot of students will not ever read a paper before they actually turn it in. So you're the first person to read that paper. So they'll turn it in and say, phew, I got it done. But they will never read it, and often they won't even read your comments on the paper, right? They just turn it in and they're done with it. And as you can guess, it probably doesn't lead to a lot of learning during this process if we're doing it this way. Okay, so what we're going to try and do is help students move more toward an experienced writing process that looks more like this. And this is kind of my visual, but a more experienced writer tends to get a prompt that could be external, like your editor asks you to write something, or internal, I want to write a novel on wizards. And then they start drafting, okay? They tend to revise, edit, and proofread. They go back through the writing process multiple times in kind of a circular motion. So Roland Barthes said that writing grows more like a seed than like a line, right? It's not start at point A and go to point B. It's, okay, I have this idea, I'm going to draft it, it's going to be really messy, then I'm going to circle back and I'm going to edit, then I'm going to proofread, and maybe at some point they're going to move back and forth through this process, okay? So you could get to where you're revising and you're figuring out where the parts of my paper go, and you realize, oh, there's a chunk missing. I need to go back and brainstorm, do some pre-writing and brainstorm for a whole section that I'm going to add to this. Or I need to chop out this big section. Students often feel like revision is going back and adding commas and changing out words for better words, right? So I went back, and every time that I use the same word twice on the same page, I used my thesaurus and I changed one of the words, so it's all good now, right? So we're trying to help them see that revision is actually it's more fundamental. It's making big changes, okay? I added reverse outlining here because this is one of the processes that I really enjoy working with my students on. The idea is that once you've done a draft, you outline what you've already written and see how it's working, where there are gaps. I do this when I'm writing articles or chapters because it helps me to see how it's working and what needs to be added or cut out. So that's what we're trying to kind of move toward. And again, the arrows, I'm trying to indicate that it's not going to be the same every time, right? It's not going to start in one place and go to the end. Every writing process is going to look very different. So we're going to talk about 4 things that we can do to help students move toward that more experienced writing process today. The first thing is creating a good writing assignment. I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's really important, and we're going to try and move away from, write 20 pages on the cause of the Civil War and turn it in at the end of the semester, and move more toward things that are local and contextual and a little bit more dynamic. We're going to talk about how to deliver a writing assignment really clearly so that students really know what's expected of them. How to scaffold that writing process for them so that they, again, aren't just turning in 20 pages at the end of the semester, but they have, a paper plan due at some point, or a first draft, or something. And talk even maybe a little bit about some ways that you can do this without adding to your workload, which I know is really important. And finally, we're going to talk about how to teach students how to do the assignment, which is so important. And we tend to think that they can get everything they need to know in freshman writing, but that's so not the case, as you all know. They don't know how to write a lab report or an exegetical paper or whatever you're doing in your areas. So we need to be doing that with them as well. In the end, we're really talking about being their coach and not just the scorekeeper, right? So how can we coach them through the writing process rather than just saying, do this, and I'm going to tell you whether you did well or not, right? And that's how they're going to learn to do it better. Do you have any questions at this point so far? Doing okay? Okay. All right. So let's talk about creating a good writing assignment. So good writing assignments, and this is simplistic language, but good writing assignments have purposes, okay? Again, I know that feels really simple, but I think it's really important to remind faculty that you should be aware of why you're giving an assignment and really clearly communicate to the students what you want the students to learn when they're working on this writing assignment. And even more fun is for it to have a rhetorical situation. This is a big word, but basically it just means a writing situation or a context. So if we can develop assignments that are set in a unique situation, like something that has to do with APU, for instance, they're not going to be able to cut and paste that from the internet. Okay, they have to actually make it contextual. So for instance, this is an example of a rhetorical situation. It's a movie. A movie has a genre, right? It's comedy, it's history, it's all these different things. It has a message that it's trying to get across often. Not all of them. I don't think Dude, Where's My Car had a message, but some movies have a message that they're trying to portray. It has a purpose and a tone, definitely. And it has context, cultural and historical context, okay? And things that are happening outside of the theater. And then in terms of audience, this is really important. This is who is the movie aimed at? Is it aimed at American teenage girls? Is it aimed at professionals? Whoever it's aimed at, we want to really consider that. And then often there's a secondary audience, like a critic, who maybe isn't in that initial audience, but is able to assess how well they reach that audience. So in this situation, if it's a paper that they're writing, you would be the secondary audience, right? Hopefully. And if we can remove you from being the primary audience, that creates a really exciting new situation. A lot of times we just create assignments and we expect the students to write to us. But if instead you can create an imaginary or a realistic rhetorical situation, like write for one of these journals, these theological journals, and figure out what the audience expects of anything that's written for this journal, then they're going to be able to be writing to them and not to you, which is making it for a more unique experience. Okay, so that's just the definition of a rhetorical situation. So a good assignment has a situation. Again, it's something that could be real or imagined, but you're creating some sort of situation that you want them to approach. And it also challenges and engages students. I think it's really important that we're creating something that's going to raise the bar and that doesn't feel like that they're redoing things that they've done a million times before. And if you give them some choice, maybe they can find something that they can engage with more readily. So that will help spur them on to actually doing the assignment. When it comes time to deliver the assignment, we want to give the assignment in writing always. It just makes for fewer mistakes and misinterpretations later on. But I usually give a full page, and that full page includes several different elements. But for instance, the purpose, subject, and audience of the assignment, right? You're writing to whomever, right? You're writing to the audience of this particular journal. Here's why we're doing this assignment. Here's the subject. Or the fact that you can choose your subject would be included on this assignment sheet. What kinds of sources can they use? And how many sources do you expect would be something that you would include on this assignment sheet. Are there any style elements that they should consider? So I always say, this is written in third person, or this is written in first person. And I really try to make it clear that it's not because I want it that way and I'm the person in charge of this class, so you should do it, but because you're writing an exegetical paper, and typically exegetical papers are written in third person, and these are the kind of rhetorical elements that they include, right? So by doing so, if we help them to understand, that this genre has conventions that we're trying to write toward, then they can move to the next genre and start to assess, okay, well, what's the audience message, purpose, tone, word choice, all of these elements of this next rhetorical situation, and then they can be able to move forward on their own more readily. Does that make sense? Okay. And how should they present the writing? All these different details are things that you want to give more info, not less information. And if you can give access to examples, that's incredibly helpful to them. I've gotten into the habit of, at the beginning of every semester, I have my students sign a little sheet that says, you can use any of my writing for future students. And I don't want my name on it, or feel free to leave my name on it. And I have that on file. It's a Google Doc. And then I save everything so that I can post it on my Sakai sites, so students have access to it. Yeah?
What do you mean by how should the writing be presented?
Mm-hmm. So some faculty are really particular. They want it in a folder. They want it, they want it online. They want it in some other way. So it's just giving those details. Cuts down on emails throughout the semester too, which is really nice. I feel that giving samples that other students gave, and I give a whole range. So I'll give, they're not all perfect, and some of them are poor, or there's a whole range. So it's not just all A's necessarily. And we'll go through them together, and we'll say things like, how is this one successful, or how is this one not as successful? I think it helps them to get started. It helps them to kind of expand their writing process and not wait till the last minute and do that panicking part. So I'm trying to give them the confidence up front that they're going to be able to approach the assignment. And I think if it's paired with really scaffolding the assignment so that they're getting those kind of mini assignments all along the semester and not having to, waiting to the last minute and panicking and say, oh, wasn't there a paper online that I can just cut and paste from? Then maybe that would help, but that's just rotten. So, there's always going to be some bad eggs too. Any other questions about that? Okay, yeah. So I like giving access to examples. And again, using them as a teaching tool. So, and really trying to assess them together, what's working with this and what's problematic. So let's talk about scaffolding the writing process. I really like to try and help students from the very beginning plan their assignment. So the day that I give an assignment in class, I sit down with my class, or I stand and they sit, or something like that. And we make sure that we've done some writing in class before they leave, right? So we'll do some sort of brainstorming session in class. So we may do a free writing session. We may do clusters. We may do discussions. Or I may throw out, a question about, what are some possible topics that we could write on for this paper? And I'm going to get them in groups, and I'm going to get them brainstorming up front. So typically when I assign a big paper, I use the whole class session to help students get started. Okay? And that way, before they've even left my classroom, they have writing down. They have, a tentative thesis or a research question, something to get going with, so that they're not, it just helps kind of lubricate the process up front. And it helps them to see what my expectations are, because they can think out loud, and I can ask them questions and help direct them right from that beginning point. I also try to help them plan their time, and I include mini assignments. I added some cool slides here that I forgot about. So when I'm talking about planning their time, I'm trying to say, okay, I'll like draw a line on the board and I'll say, okay, this is when I assign the paper. This is when it's due. Come up and mark when you think you'll start this paper by your natural inclination, and I'll get a bunch that are like right over here. They're just really honest, and I'll say, okay, so I'm not going to let you do that. We're going to have a paper plan due here, and then we're going to have, a first draft due here, right in the middle, and then here we're going to do peer workshops, and we're going to do these other things. So I help them plan their time that way with these kind of mini assignments. So this is just some examples for things that you could include, and I wouldn't do all of these for one assignment. But for instance, you could do in-class discussions and preparations at the beginning. You could have them write a one-page paper plan, or so a lot of people like outlines. I'm not a huge fan of outlines ahead of time. I like reverse outlining, but if it works for you, that's great. Some sort of plan for how they're going to spend their time. You could do even like a mini contract, when are you going to have these things done? You have the period for gathering and research. A librarian visit is helpful for keeping them thinking about their research throughout. Annotated bibliographies, research bundles are kind of the same idea, but a little bit more casual. Drafts, you can do what I call a zero draft, or a discovery draft is what Dr. Glyer calls it. The idea that just bring in a first draft and it doesn't have to be at all formed in any way, just your messiest draft. Kind of challenge them to just take risks and put it all down on paper and bring it in. And I'm going to give it a check or whatever you give it, I'm not going to read it, just bring it in. And then they can discuss their ideas or how did that work for them. You could have them bring a first draft in and have some peer workshops. Second draft, you can make them bring it to the writing center, for instance. So these are all things that you don't have to do any work on, but that you can help them kind of scaffold their time. Peer review, you could, again, or conferences, if you have the time and inclination, can be really helpful for developing that project throughout the semester. And polished paper, and then you'll notice the polished paper, that's the final paper. I still have a couple of things, little dots after it, because for instance, I like, and this is kind of mean, when they bring in their final papers, I'll make them get it out and read it. And they're like, no, it's all done. I don't want to read it. But I make them read it in class. And I say, get out a pen and mark anything that you would change, because I want to know what you would change at this point. Why not? And they're like, but it's done. I'm like, writing is never done. It's only due, right? You have to turn it in, And so that's just something, or when I bring feedback, I make them read it in class and I make them discuss it, because I want to know that they actually read my comments, right? I worked really hard on them. Yes, exactly. So just because a D student wants to rewrite doesn't mean that even the A- students sometimes want to rewrite for that A+. So I like opening it up to everyone. But things that you could do for that student who wants feedback is to have them go to the writing center, right? We're doing 11,000 appointments this year in the writing center, so it's active. So send your students. And also, they can do things that are low stakes for them. So having them come in and peer review, but that is not one-on-one feedback. Or having the students stop by office hours again. You always have office hours. All right. And the last thing is to teach students how to do that research and cite in their field, or how to write the paper generally, okay? We tend to think that, students know how to research once they get to their senior year or to graduate school. You wish that they would be able to research in graduate school, but it's not always the case, as you know, and they need to be taught. And it's different for each situation that they're encountering. So if they're writing, again, for your field, it's going to be a new situation, and you kind of have to treat it that way and teach them along the process. I try to teach any writing situation as a writer and be really open about my struggles as a writer, or things that I'm researching this thing right now and I just spent an hour on the librarian chat trying to figure out about X, Y, and Z. Trying to just bring them these resources and show them that you use them too in your writing processes can be really helpful. So one thing you can do is to actually research together in class. You could have the class come up with a sample research question and then show them how you might use, different search engines to get into that. You can plan, again, the librarian visit or have a librarian visit your classroom. You can explain why you use a certain style of documentation in your field. That's really important because they seem to think that this is totally arbitrary. APA versus MLA versus SBL versus Chicago versus Turabian. Okay, in some ways it is a little bit arbitrary. But if you can help them to understand that in psychology, dates are important because we need to know that this is a recent study, et cetera, et cetera. So that's helpful to them. It just, I don't know about you, but if I know why I need to do something, it helps me to remember to do it too. So that background is helpful. You can explain the importance of research. You can explain why this is relevant, that you're not just asking them to get 6 sources and plug them in, but that it gives them authority, that it gives them those shoulders to stand on to make their argument relevant and authoritative can be really helpful. And again, explaining the importance of citations. You have to tell them why they need to cite. Tell students and what they need to cite is also really important. So you can't just expect that they know, how many words in a row need to be cited or how they need to cite in different situations. So that's all really important. So ultimately, you're going to help students avoid plagiarism by creating a good assignment, delivering it clearly, scaffolding the process, and teaching students how to do the assignment. Even when you think that they know how to do the assignment, you need to make sure that they really do. So the idea is just to be their coach and not their scorekeeper.